Thank you so much for choosing CAS TV. Welcome. You're watching Conservation Conversation with me, Chemtai Kirui. It's always a pleasure to have you join us. For those who follow me on my social platform, you already know what you're going to speak about today. But if you're watching this for the first time, we're going to talk about architecture and specifically the role of architecture in promoting sustainable development in Kenya. With me in studio is none other than the Vice President of Architecture Association of Kenya. Her name is Florence Nyole, and she's going to explain a little bit about how sustainability comes to play when you're talking about buildings and the beautiness of construction and all those good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us, Florence.
Thank you, Chemtai, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that when we made that call, like we really need to have this conversation following the report that AAK, and I'm actually going to be referring to Architecture Association of Kenya as AAK, unless you're going to give me another name.
No, it's absolutely
AAK is fine, right?
Yes, yeah, AAK is
when we saw
fine.
that annual report, when you're talking building environment, I really thought it would be really nice for us to have this conversation. Yeah. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. So AAK is shortened, but full name is Architectural Association of Kenya. We are a body corporate including 8 professions within the built environment. That is architects, engineers, planners, construction managers, quantity surveyors, landscape architects, environmental design consultants, who are maybe going to be quite a major topic today, interior designers, and even at the end of the day, all those 8 professions are quite keen in the built environment. We've been around for about 55 years now. It's quite an old association. We started with 4 chapters and now we have 8 chapters. And what we do is to ensure that the built environment and the natural environment are well kept, and our vision is actually strive for excellence within the natural and the built environment. So that's in a nutshell what AAK is about. And also we promote and advocate for built environment professionals, as well as a much more robust policy and engagement with built environment professionals across the country.
So probably we can look at some of the questions that some of you guys sent in. And of course, you can be part of it as well. You follow me on my Twitter account, you're seeing there on the screen. And then if you have questions early in advance, I'll always let you know, and then you can have a moment. It's like I'm just here with my tablet reading it on, but it's you who's asking questions to Florence. So the first question they were asking is, they want to understand Safari Green Building Index, how it works and how it can be used to promote sustainability in construction industry in the country.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah. It's good to know that people are interested in a tool like that, which is something that sounds like it's very new. But actually this is the culmination of a 10-year plus journey at AAK. When the Environmental Design Consultants chapter was started, their vision was to actually improve on how sustainability is achieved within the built environment. And one of the things they embarked on, which is almost 10 years ago, was to actually work on a green building rating tool. There are very many green building rating tools actually out there in the world. We have LEED, LEED, we have the Green Star, we have what the World Bank pushes under IFC called the EDGE. And there are very many. But at the end of the day, we don't have something that is homegrown, that looks at architecture or building or construction through the lens of tropical climate under which Kenya falls. So it was important that we start treating our buildings in a way that is commensurate with what it is we do in our environment. And that is why the Green Building Rating Tool was formed. Now, as a green building rating tool, the Safari Green Building Rating Index actually is a very important tool in enabling us to also start looking at how the performance of the buildings and the construction within our society is being done. And one of the things we realize is that there are very many opportunities when it comes to when you rate your buildings. Sometimes it unlocks green financing, sometimes it enables even buildings to receive awards and so on and so forth. But bottom line is that means that the architect and all the professions who are involved within that particular building or construction have actually followed and tried as much as possible to be conscious of the sustainability aspect within that building, and hence the reason why the Safari Green Building Index was actually introduced. And we're very happy that last year we managed to launch it, and now it's in full operational mode, and we hope that we'll be able to now start rolling it out to the market for people to actually use in their buildings.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think I'll ask, how do AAK ensure that architects and construction professionals in the country are trained in environmental sustainable practice then?
So it's very interesting, and I say this a lot, is that sustainability is something that's taught throughout university, especially for courses in architecture and in construction management, engineering, across the board. Because for you to actually design a building, it means you're trying to house people, and those people have to be comfortable inside there. So it's not only just about the plan and the beautiful designs, but it's also about the level of comfort that people are able to achieve within those spaces. So the curriculum within the university is there, and it's constantly being evolved in order to cater for the current market needs that are there. So you'll probably hear something called building science at the end of the day, where they really teach with regards to sustainability and all the elements that have got to do with ensuring that sustainability is looked into during design. On the other part is that now, once people have graduated and they are working, is that we continuously carry out what we call CPD programs. These are seminars that enable us to tackle emerging issues within the environment that affect the built environment. So last year we had a webinar on waste management in buildings. Another time we had a whole convention that was in 2021 talking about climate action and how to move along in terms of sustainability. Yeah. Yes. So those are some of the initiatives that AAK has in place, and we also encourage our members, because we also have an MOU with the Kenya Green Building Society, and KGBS also train people on EDGE, and so we encourage them to be trained also on EDGE, so that we're also able to have a good number of people who are quite aware regards sustainability. And now with the Safari Green Building Index, we should be able now to move ahead and train our members and be able to roll out, so that as many members as possible are able to understand the role of the tool and how it can assist in achieving sustainability within the built environment. Yeah.
Very interesting. And I love the fact that you talked about the waste management, that you guys had the webinar and the climate action. Yes. Right? Because the thing I was looking at is how the construction industry can have a significant impact when it comes to the issue that we are facing now, like climate change. Sure. and also the carbon emission and all those things, right? So when we have that idea incorporated in building environment, yes, it makes sense, right? Totally. I think the steps that AAK takes to promote sustainable building practices and reduce the environment impact of construction in Kenya is something that you've mentioned a bit. Yes. Could you explain a little bit more?
Yes, so we are very keen on sustainability in all ways and in all efforts. We really encourage our members, as they are practicing, to ensure that their buildings are sustainable as much as possible, that they do follow basic green building principles as much as possible. And now that we've rolled out the Safari Green Building tool, we hope that it is the first thing that AAK members are the ones who will embrace it and be able to use it in their buildings, even just to rate. Sometimes does not necessarily have to be something that you do for commercially, but you can do it internally to see how your building is performing when it comes to the environment. The other thing is that we've for the climate justice agenda quite strongly. In fact, we had the Kenya We Want campaign last year, and during that campaign we were very keen on climate justice and climate action. And that is one way to ensure that even as we continue to talk about urbanization, which we know is happening quite rapidly, we make sure that urbanization is happening in a sustainable manner. We are looking also at pushing policies such as the building code, which is currently underway. It's about to be passed as a regulation with the new parliament, and we hope that the building code will be put in place. And what that will do is that then that means that people who are practicing in the built environment have to follow the building code, and it has quite a number of elements in there that talk about how sustainability should be achieved. And this will have a rollover effect because the building code is a code that the counties will use, those who are approving buildings will use to see that the buildings that are coming up will be looked at and that they meet the aspect of everything. We're also very keen on issues to do with waste management, and like I said, we do hold webinars, we educate our membership on as much as possible to encourage them so that they're able to actually see beyond just their day-to-day activities, and maybe encourage them to think about the waste that they produce in their construction sites and how that is taken. We also have a very keen agenda to use local materials, locally available materials to promote the local economy, but also at the same time to reduce something called embodied energy, which if you imagine a product that's coming from outside Kenya, how much energy it has taken for it to arrive here in Kenya, vis-a-vis if you use the locally available materials such as the blocks and our local stone and so on and so forth. So the whole idea is to have a holistic approach to the sustainability aspect in the construction industry, and that's what AAK stands for. The other thing is to ensure that we do have professionals on board in the construction industry, which we are really, really keen. Many people build without professionals. We're talking almost 20% of the building stock in Kenya is under the care of professionals. What happens to the other 80%? So people are building haphazardly and they're not able to be able to ensure that their construction sites have the necessary inputs in terms of sustainability. We've also partnered with several organizations. We've partnered with the Habitat for Humanity International. We produced a document called the Healthy Homes Guidelines, and it's basically a checklist to show that your building is actually sustainable and basically healthy, which at the end of the day is something that came up because of how people were cooped up in their homes during COVID-19. We also worked with the KDI, this is the Concrete Design Initiative, to create inclusive infrastructure, especially in informal settlements, so that even as we are developing roads and building for them schools and public spaces, those have to be done in an inclusive manner to ensure that everybody is at the table, there are professionals, the community is involved, the government is involved, and holistically we're able to push the agenda of urbanization in a more sustainable manner.
And
yes.
I love the fact that AAK has the plan and the intention of ensuring that this sustainability is made when it comes to building environment, right? But you also mentioned two other parties there. We have government and we have communities, and it's good you've mentioned urbanization. It's not only in Nairobi. You go to other towns right now, like Nakuru, you go to Eldoret, the buildings are coming up in really speedy way. So probably I'll ask the work that the county government and the government is doing, working with you probably if it's doing so, to ensure that this is achievable. Yeah.
So like I mentioned, we've run a campaign before. Let me look at it twofold. One is nationally and another one locally, maybe county government. So the national one, we talked about the Kenya We Want campaign, and in there we're talking about sustainable development and urbanization across our counties, which is very important. And this is something that has to come from the national government and maybe something that can be implemented within the counties, because like you're saying, all counties are urbanizing. We have roads being built, we have markets being put up, we have schools being set up. How are they being done? Are professionals being involved? And how are those places looking like? You have a market and that's not built properly, you find that the air in there is not comfortable. So it's just to encourage the government to also look at climate in a way that's just beyond policies, but also in the way in which it implements its own projects across the board. Then when you look at the counties, we usually run a program called the Jeo na Mjengo campaign. So in this Jeo na Mjengo, we encourage counties to make sure that any projects that are being undertaken actually have professionals on board. And we are now looking at it the other way, and we're saying, let's maybe go to the community, as you say, and talk to them and tell them, if you're putting up even a small house, you need an architect, you need an engineer, you need a professional to guide you in this thing. And in that way, you not only save costs, but you also end up with a house that is functioning, a house that is healthy, and a house that's important. We've also, in several occasions, engaged with government. Like for instance, we've given input or feedback on some of the work that the government is doing. In the previous regime, we really engaged when it came to the affordable housing program, and we know that it's something that currently is still being pursued. And we're encouraging the government to use locally available materials, use local fundis, and to some extent improve on the quality of housing that is actually available, so that you don't have very small houses with dark rooms, but rooms that are quite habitable in terms of spaces. We've also commented on a couple of markets that the government is doing. These are large infrastructure installments that need input from professionals. So I know we've worked very well with the State Department of Housing and Urbanization, and we've been able to push some of these ideas that we have as AAK. But where we're reaching right now is that we want to be proactive, want to be at the table when they're making those decisions with already our input in them, so that it's not that we are reacting to something that they've done, but our input is already in place, and that we are working together to achieve a sustainable urbanization development within our urban areas. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And I think something else that came out of the report, and I really didn't want to delve deep into it because yes, I shared it with my colleagues on business, and yes, they talked about the building cost and the taxes, yes, and all those good stuff. Yes. Yeah. But in as much as you're talking about affordability of housing, and you've mentioned very clearly, like, we need to have lighting in the house, for example, there's also the outside part, the recreational. And I think there was a time I spoke to someone from Kibra here in Nairobi, where they've created that space where people can go out. As much as probably these have informal settlers, they still need that space for them, yes, to go and unwind life. Absolutely. So those are the things that, yes, comes in, yes, and we're hoping to see that much better.
Yes, in fact, just to add is that when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just a building. Yeah. There are many things that go into it, and we push the government even in terms of what you call non-motorized transportation. That way you already reduce carbon emissions through from vehicular movement and motorized transportation. We talk about open and green spaces, which allow people to have breathing areas where they can recreate, as you're saying, and that spaces where they can congregate and have fun, children can play, and so on and so forth. So we've pushed, and we are pushing that particular agenda, over and above the many things that we're doing.
Yeah. How do you see the work of Architectural Association of Kenya? When you're talking about SGBI, falls under this ESG.
So I think, of course, we know the trend in the world is to begin to really look at matters of ESG quite critically, and SGBI is literally at the front of trying to help us to do that, actually, not only as an association, but also to encourage our members to be that. I know people usually go for something like ISO certification, people go for, international certifications. So it would be interesting that if somebody is looking to be able to score well in their ESG scorecard, it would be very important that they also begin to look at sustainability in this manner. And if you rate your buildings over a period of time, then of course that means you're responding quite closely to the needs of ESG. So we are the forefront of that. Actually, like I said before, we've partnered, we have an MOU with the Kenya Green Building Society, and in that MOU, these are some of the things that we have in place to train our members on these things. Remember, sometimes because we're coming from a very technical background of architecture and engineering and very tough courses, where in our minds we're just thinking about building, sometimes it's also good to bring on board other partners who are highly involved in this, and to be able to move along. We've held at least 2 webinars, or let me not call them webinars, actually seminars and breakfast meetings, and we've discussed the issue of ESG and taking the next step to make sure that our association as an association, but also our membership, are practicing ESG as much as possible, even in their practices. And I think it goes without saying that ESG also helps in terms of green financing, and it helps people to be ranked to some extent in a good way, and be able to afford financing, and to also create employment, create development projects, and so on and so forth. So the benefits of ESG are quite major, and we hope that we'll be able to reap those benefits with having our green building rating tool. Yeah.
And even earlier when you mentioned that those buildings which wins awards, investors are looking at this when maybe for qualifications for that. Right?
Yeah. If you look at the buildings that were designed back in the 70s and early 80s, is that they really followed sustainability principles, because naturally that's how an architect is supposed to design. You look at the sun path, where you place your windows, where you place your services, even how you orient the longer part of the building. You make sure the size of your windows in terms of bringing in light, that you're also able to bring in heat but also ventilate without using aircon and things like that. So those buildings in the 80s, look at Sharia House, look at our own Parliament building, buildings around what you can ideally called Government Square, form some of that. If you go to the University of Nairobi, you have quite a number of those buildings that also have that. For instance, the library, the main library at main campus, where we have the High Slope building, quite a number of buildings that actually do respond to environmental design principles. But you'll find that they are in one era, back in the day. So how do we then move to this next era, where we are seeing a lot of buildings with a lot of glass coming up. We're seeing a lot of buildings using aluminium. One, of course, with technological advances, then those become the new technology, and people are embracing them. But I think we need not be so focused on that. We need to also make sure that even as we're bringing in new technology, we're still incorporating green design principles in the technology that we're having. And this is not to say that new technologies should not be introduced, but how we introduce them, we should continue to follow the principles of green building design, and those principles are there, quite very well known across the board. And the idea is just to create a comfortable environment for people who are inside, whether they're using light to see, whether they're feeling heat within their bodies, or even in terms of sound and smell, where you have waste control and so on and so forth. So there are quite a number of buildings that are there. Maybe we'll just be able to espouse on them, because I wouldn't want to start mentioning them right here in this particular program, lest
you can finish.
I cannot finish them, but they are there, and I've just given just one example of the Coca-Cola building here.
I know how beautiful and massive it is in that land.
Yes.
It has managed to occupy that land really well, and there's still space, and it's a very attractive building to look at, right?
Yes.
What if we bring it down to some of us, or those individuals who are building their personal home, And in my head, I'm thinking some of the things that they need to incorporate there, even in their planning, probably, like I mentioned, a little bit of recreation, where they're going to plant trees, but also the energy part of it. I don't know. You're going to explain that, please?
Yes. No, I'm happy to explain that. So, I mean, when it comes to the part of the home, I think it's the easier animal to deal with here, because it's a personal choice. You can actually make a choice and say, I will go sustainable. The size of your windows will matter, so that you're not constantly having your light switched on during the day, where you locate certain services, like where the sun is hottest, either in the morning or in the evening. That's where you locate services, so that during the day you don't have to constantly keep having to exhaust hot air out of your building. But you mentioned something very important when it comes to the environment around that particular house, and that's a very key thing when it comes to housing. These recreational spaces, when somebody is doing a plan for their plot or piece of land, then it's important that even the way they locate it, they're able to maximize on the use of green spaces within that area. It's possible to plant trees as much as possible. People who've planted trees in sizes of land as small as an eighth of an acre, and the idea is to make sure that this particular house is consistently able to, one, access daylight, as much as possible, especially in areas where you constantly have people occupying, like your lounge, your bedrooms, your kitchen, and so on and so forth. So you don't have your lights constantly on. Then make sure that you're able to also ventilate the building quite nicely. You don't have to put on a fan unless it's extremely necessary. You know, right now it's extremely hot. We almost may not have anticipated that the climate of Nairobi would have reached these levels. And also the kind of materials that you use, you know, can you reuse as much as you can in terms of reducing the construction waste that comes from your house as you're doing your construction? Can you use local materials as much as possible? Even just the idea of using local labor and having some technology transfer, those are some areas of sustainability that we can look into. And by doing so, we are able to move the agenda on sustainability as much as possible. When it comes to energy, I was talking about putting on the lights throughout the day. We can also have solar powered homes. I think that's now a trend. It's already in place, and I think there was even a government policy somewhere regarding the use of solar technology in our homes for heating water as well as for lighting and powering the sockets. So those are some areas that you can use that. I see people also using biogas, which is a very good thing. I know there's also wind power, although it's not well embraced, but it can also really help to generate power. So using renewable sources of energy as much as possible within the home in areas where you can actually make that decision yourself, those can really move along the idea of construction being sustainable.
And when you're speaking about sustainability, you look at it long term. If you're not using a lot of energy, if you're not having to switch on the light on and off, this is your dream home. You do this now and you're going to enjoy the benefit going forward, right?
Absolutely.
You'll have to have this idea when you work with someone who knows, and this is where now architecture like yourself comes in, right? What are some of the dangers that people at home don't know when you're building a house without involving a professional in it?
I think the first and foremost thing is that people think they're saving money. They never save money because they put up a wall here and they break it down, build another one. So ideally, maybe the cost of that wall could have paid your architect or your engineer, architect and engineer to construct or to help you with the designs that you have envisioned in your mind. But also the danger is, for example, who then takes responsibility in case something goes wrong? You know, if God forbid the building collapses, at least if you're talking about a private home, that's probably two stories at most. But if you're talking about maybe somebody putting up an apartment block, and we've seen this happening across so there's that professional responsibility and the professional liability when I'm involved in a project to be able to ensure that it meets the standards and specifications of construction. We constantly usually check on the project to make sure even the quality of the materials that are being used are of good standard. The materials are also not toxic. They're also, you know, good materials that even when you move into that home, you can literally say, yes, I am now living in my home and I'm very happy to have spent money in this. I think maybe just to wrap it up in terms of that is also just the advice that we find a lot of homes requiring when it comes to waste management. And waste can be in two ways. It can be the liquid waste, which comes from our washrooms and the kitchen, and then there's the solid waste and how we dispose of it. So the issue of the use of composting can be quite good, and people can even reuse it within their gardens. But also the issue of wastewater treatment, so that even if we know the old technology was the use of septic tanks, but now we have newer and newer technology of waste treatment plants, such as a biodigester, specifically for that particular waste. And we have very many companies doing quite wonderful work to make sure that the water that you use or that is being considered as wastewater can be recycled, maybe to water your plants around your compound, maybe to just clean the pathways and so on and so forth. So in our own small little ways, we can actually improve our contribution to sustainability in the way we construct our home.
So this now brings me to the challenges. What are some of the challenges, and we only have 2-3 minutes here, that you're facing when it comes to implementing this sustainable development in construction?
I think, like you say, information is power. It's important that the public gets to know what we do as professionals. We still have a big gap. We are still seeing many people not having professionals on board for their construction projects. So that's a big challenge that we face. And to be honest with you, that's the main reason why buildings collapse. But then also even just the type of materials that people are using across the board needs to be verified, and I believe there's a certain level of monitoring of the quality of materials that are being used there. Okay. But we also have a challenge when it comes to buildings that are just coming up without professionals. I'm sure there's a bit of a lack in terms of the enforcement by county governments, especially in jurisdictions where there's a lot of construction. So there's need for county governments to really come out strongly and push for enforcement, make sure that buildings are approved, and they work together with the National Construction Authority to monitor the constructions that are going on in urban areas. This is important because then that's the only way we'll make sure that professionals are onboarded in these projects. And even as we move forward, we know the challenge of climate is here with us. We need to now do better so that we're able to live in a way that we'll be able to leave something for the future generation. So as architects, we are committed to that, and I believe through the efforts that we've put in as AAK, we should be able to move this particular conversation ahead in terms of sustainability.
Yeah. Interesting, Florence. I'm looking at these questions and I think we've done it justice. And if you want to follow the conversation that we have it here on the conservation conversation, all this question, like I said, some feel, because when you are having conversations, some interesting things keep coming up and they ask, but most of this, that shows how involved people are, and they really want to know more about environment and what they can do in their own little part. And we can't escape this part of climate change, and like you've mentioned, it cuts across, like it's not a one-man fight, right? But before we finish, Florence, I'm sure there are things probably you'd have wanted to speak about, but the questions here didn't really touch on it, so for a minute you can finish with that.
I think it's just to say thank you to you, Chemtai, for giving us this opportunity. We are always happy to share as much information, and because you picked us up from our Status of the Built Environment report launch, which happened last week, Tuesday, we are happy to now take this to the next level. We'll be launching still another report. We launch these reports every half year. It's only that last year we did it once. And the idea is to just give information regarding the things that are happening in the built environment. AAK continues to be the leading built environment professionals association across not only Kenya, in the region, but most likely even across Africa. And we hope that we'll be able to take excellence through to the built and natural environment.
Thank you, Florence. I hope to see you again.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you should be a friend of the program.
Yes.
Well, I've been speaking to Florence Nyole. She is the Vice President of Architecture Association of Kenya, here today to talk about the role of architecture in building sustainable development in the country. I hope you've enjoyed this program. I'm going to see you on the next one. My name is Chemtai Kirui. Have a blessed one. Bye.